In the long and often turbulent history of humankind, few conflicts have left such a profound and indelible mark upon our world as the Second World War. It was a global maelstrom, a crucible of human endeavor, suffering, and immense change. Over 6 years, from the fields of Europe to the vast expanses of the Pacific, nations clashed in a struggle that would redefine the very balance of power on our planet. The echoes of this conflict resonate even to this day, shaping our societies, our technology, and our understanding of what we are capable of for both good and ill. We are about to embark on a journey back in time, to explore a series of pivotal moments. These were not merely battles or political decisions, they were inflection points, moments where the great, complex machinery of history shifted its course. Each event, a link in a chain of consequence, propelled the world towards an outcome that was, at the time, far from certain. To understand our present, we must first look to these defining episodes that forged the modern era from the fires of global war. Join me as we witness the spark that ignited the flame in Poland, soar with the defenders in the skies over Britain, feel the shockwaves of Pearl Harbor, storm the beaches of Normandy, and finally confront the terrifying dawn of a new atomic age. These are the key moments of the Second World War, events that not only decided the fate of millions, but forever altered the trajectory of human civilization itself. Let us begin. Our story begins in the late summer of 1939. A nervous peace hangs over Europe, but it is a fragile, brittle thing. For years, the continent has watched the relentless, aggressive expansion of Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler, Austria, the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia. Each has been consumed piece by piece, with the world hoping that each concession would be the last. But the predator's appetite, it seems, is insatiable. Its gaze now falls upon its eastern neighbor, Poland. This, it would transpire, was a frontier that could not be crossed without consequence. On the first day of September, under the fabricated pretext of a Polish attack, the storm breaks. The German war machine, the Wehrmacht, unleashes a new and terrifying form of warfare, the Blitzkrieg or lightning war. It is a strategy of overwhelming force, of speed and shock. Panzer divisions, formidable armored beasts of steel, spearhead the assault, punching through the Polish defenses with brutal efficiency. They do not engage in the static trench warfare of the previous generation. They bypass strong points, driving deep into the heart of the country, sowing chaos and severing lines of communication. Following closely behind the armored spearheads are the mechanized infantry, consolidating the gains and mopping up resistance, and above, a constant, menacing presence, the Luftwaffe. Stuka dive bombers, with their terrifying siren-induced shriek, plummet from the skies, acting as a form of flying artillery. They terrorize defenders and civilians alike, shattering morale and destroying infrastructure with pinpoint precision. The Polish army, though brave and numerous, is caught utterly off guard by this new doctrine. Their forces are organized for a more traditional, linear conflict. They fight with extraordinary courage, their cavalry launching desperate, gallant charges against the unfeeling steel of the panzers. It is a poignant, tragic symbol of an old world colliding with a new mechanized reality of conflict. But bravery alone cannot stem such a tide. The Polish Air Force is swiftly neutralized, its planes destroyed on the ground, before they can even mount a meaningful defense. The speed and coordination of the German attack is simply overwhelming, a symphony of destruction conducted with ruthless precision. The geography of Poland, with its vast open plains, offers little in the way of natural defenses against such a mobile onslaught. The Wehrmacht exploits this terrain to its full advantage, executing vast pincer movements that encircle and trap entire Polish armies. The defenders find themselves cut off, their command structures shattered, their supply lines severed. What was intended to be a defense of the nation's borders becomes a desperate, fragmented fight for survival against a seemingly unstoppable foe. On the 3rd of September, Britain and France, honoring their guarantees to Poland, issue an ultimatum to Germany. It is ignored, and so, with a heavy heart, they declare war. Yet, for Poland, this declaration brings no immediate relief. The so-called phony war begins in the West, a period of strange inaction, while in the East, a nation is being systematically dismantled. The promised aid from its allies is too little, and far too late to alter the grim reality on the ground. The final devastating blow comes not from the west, but from the east. On the 17th of September, the Soviet Union, having signed the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Germany, invades Poland from the other side. This cynical pact, a non-aggression treaty on the surface, contains secret protocols to carve up Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe between the two totalitarian powers. The Polish nation is now caught in an inescapable vice, squeezed between two rapacious empires. The Polish government flees into exile, and Warsaw, the proud capital, endures weeks of relentless bombing and shelling before it finally capitulates at the end of the month. The last pockets of organized resistance are crushed. In just over 4 weeks, a sovereign European nation of over 30 million people has been erased from the map. The brutal efficiency of the campaign shocks the world and demonstrates the formidable power of the German military. The invasion of Poland is more than just the first campaign of the war. It is the event that makes the conflict truly global and unavoidable. It shatters any remaining illusions of appeasement and sets the stage for the immense struggle to come. The swift, brutal conquest serves as a terrifying dress rehearsal for what Germany will unleash upon Western Europe in the coming year. The world now understands the nature of the threat it faces. The Polish September, as it came to be known, was the spark, a brutal, calculated act of aggression that plunged a continent and soon the entire world into its darkest chapter. The first domino had fallen, and the chain reaction it set in motion would consume the globe for 6 long, terrible years. The war had begun, not with a whimper, but with the roar of engines and the scream of bombs over the plains of Poland. By the summer of 1940, a dark shadow had fallen across continental Europe. The Blitzkrieg, which had so brutally dissected Poland, had swept westwards. Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, and most shockingly of all, France, had all fallen in a matter of weeks. The British Expeditionary Force had been miraculously evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk, but it had left behind its heavy equipment. Now Britain stood alone, a defiant island fortress facing a triumphant and seemingly invincible Nazi Germany. Hitler's final obstacle to total domination of Western Europe was the English Channel. To cross that narrow strip of water, Germany needed to achieve one critical objective: air superiority. Without control of the skies, the Royal Navy, still the most powerful in the world, would decimate any invasion fleet, and so the stage was set for a new kind of battle, one fought not by armies in trenches, but by young men in sophisticated flying machines high in the summer skies. The Battle of Britain had begun, and upon its outcome rested the very survival of the nation. The Luftwaffe, led by Hermann Göring, was a formidable and battle-hardened force. It possessed vast numbers of aircraft, including the Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighter, a deadly adversary, and fleets of Heinkel and Dornier bombers. Their plan was to systematically destroy the Royal Air Force, first by targeting its airfields and radar stations, and then by luring its fighters into a war of attrition they could not possibly win. It was a logical, methodical plan, backed by overwhelming numerical strength. Against this aerial armada stood Britain's RAF Fighter Command, led by the stern, pragmatic Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding. He had fewer aircraft and fewer pilots, but he possessed several crucial advantages. Firstly, he was fighting over home territory. A downed RAF pilot who survived could be back in the air within hours, whereas a downed Luftwaffe crewman was lost for good. Secondly, Britain had a secret weapon, a sophisticated integrated air defense system. This was the Dowding system. This system was a marvel of innovation. A chain of radar stations along the coast, known as Chain Home, could detect incoming German formations from over 100 miles away. This information was relayed to filter rooms, where it was plotted on large maps and then fed to sector airfields. This gave Fighter Command precious minutes of warning, allowing them to scramble their squadrons to intercept the enemy at the right time and place, rather than maintaining exhausting and fuel-intensive standing patrols. It turned the sky into a managed three-dimensional chessboard. The primary tools of this defense were two of the most iconic aircraft ever built, the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire. The Hurricane, a sturdy and reliable workhorse, was responsible for shooting down more enemy aircraft than any other. The Spitfire, with its beautiful elliptical wings and superior performance at high altitude, became the symbol of the battle. A graceful, deadly duelist perfectly suited to engaging the German Bf 109 fighters. Together, They formed a legendary partnership. The battle raged throughout July and August. The Luftwaffe relentlessly pounded coastal convoys, airfields and radar installations in the south of England. The fighting was intense, brutal and exhausting. The young pilots, many barely out of their teens, were pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance, flying multiple sorties a day, snatching sleep and food when they could. The strain was immense, the losses on both sides heavy. For the pilots, each day was a desperate gamble played out amongst the clouds. In late August, a German bomber lost in the night accidentally dropped its bombs on London. In retaliation, Churchill ordered a small raid on Berlin. The bombing caused little physical damage, but the psychological impact on Hitler was enormous. Infuriated that the RAF could strike his capital, he ordered a change in strategy. The Luftwaffe was to switch its focus from destroying the RAF to terrorizing the civilian population of London and other cities. This was the beginning of the Blitz, and it was a critical strategic error. This shift in focus, from military to civilian targets, gave Fighter Command a desperately needed respite. The battered airfields had time to repair. The exhausted ground crews could catch their breath, and the command system could recover. While London burned, the RAF was able to regroup and rebuild its strength. The Luftwaffe was now flying further, with its fighter escorts at the very limit of their range, making them more vulnerable to interception by the waiting Spitfires and Hurricanes. The climax came on the 15th of September, 1940. The Luftwaffe launched a massive daylight assault on London, believing the RAF to be on its last legs. Instead, they were met by a large, well-coordinated force of British fighters. The skies over southern England became a chaotic maelstrom of dogfights. The German bomber formations were broken up and savaged. It became clear to the German High Command that the RAF was not only still operational, but was fighting with undiminished ferocity. The losses they sustained that day were unsustainable. 2 days later, Hitler indefinitely postponed the invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. The battle was won. As the war raged in Europe, another storm was gathering on the far side of the world. The Empire of Japan, driven by its own militaristic and expansionist ambitions, had been waging a brutal war in China for years. Its goal was to establish a so-called Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which was really just a euphemism for a vast empire under its dominion. The primary obstacle to this ambition was the United States of America, whose powerful Pacific Fleet, based at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, posed a direct threat to Japan's strategic aims. Tensions had been escalating for months. The United States, though officially neutral, had imposed increasingly strict economic sanctions on Japan, culminating in a crippling oil embargo in the summer of 1941. For Japan, a nation with very few natural resources of its own, this was, well, an existential threat. It could either abandon its imperial ambitions or seize the oil-rich territories of Southeast Asia by force. It chose the latter. To do so, Japan believed it first had to neutralize the American fleet, and so a plan of audacious daring and staggering complexity was conceived by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander of Japan's combined fleet. A powerful carrier strike force, the Kido Butai, would sail in absolute secrecy across 3,500 miles of the northern Pacific. It would approach the Hawaiian Islands undetected and launch a devastating surprise attack on the naval base at Pearl Harbor. The goal was to sink the American battleships and aircraft carriers, delivering a knockout blow that would cripple the US Navy for months, if not years. On the morning of Sunday, December 7th, 1941, the plan was put into lethal motion. It was a peaceful, clear morning at Pearl Harbor. The American fleet lay at anchor, a picture of serenity. The crews were at ease, many preparing for church services or shore leave. For them, the war was a distant affair, something happening in Europe and China. Despite rising tensions, few believed an attack on the remote Hawaiian fortress was truly possible. They were about to be proven, well, catastrophically wrong. Just before 8 a.m., the first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters appeared over the mountains. The sound of their engines was the first warning most had of the impending doom. Within moments, the harbor erupted into a scene of unimaginable chaos and destruction. Torpedoes, specially modified to run in the shallow harbor waters, slammed into the hulls of the unsuspecting battleships moored along what was known as Battleship Row. Dive bombers screamed down from the sky, their bombs tearing through the decks of ships and igniting catastrophic explosions. The USS Arizona was struck by an armor-piercing bomb that penetrated its forward magazine. The resulting blast was colossal, lifting the 33,000-ton battleship out of the water and killing 1,177 of its crew instantly. It became the enduring, tomb-like symbol of the attack. Other battleships, the Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, were sunk or heavily damaged. The attack was not confined to the ships in the harbor. A second wave of Japanese aircraft struck the airfields across the island of Oahu, destroying hundreds of American planes on the ground, neatly parked wingtip to wingtip. This was a crucial part of the plan, ensuring that no effective air defense or counterattack could be mounted. The sky, which should have been filled with American fighters, belonged entirely to the attackers. In less than 2 hours, the attack was over. The Japanese strike force turned for home, having achieved a stunning tactical victory at a minimal cost to themselves. Behind them, they left a scene of utter devastation. Over 2,400 Americans were killed, and another 1,100 were wounded. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged, along with numerous other cruisers and destroyers. The heart of the US Pacific Fleet appeared to have been torn out. Yet, in this tactical masterpiece lay a monumental strategic blunder. Crucially, the Japanese had failed to destroy the base's vital infrastructure: the repair yards, the submarine pens, and most importantly, the massive fuel oil storage tanks. The destruction of these facilities would have rendered Pearl Harbor unusable as a forward base for years. And by a sheer stroke of luck, the American aircraft carriers, the most important naval assets of the new era, were at sea on maneuvers and escaped the attack completely. But the greatest miscalculation was political. The attack, intended to shatter American morale and keep them out of the war, did the precise opposite. It unified a divided and isolationist nation overnight. The following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress, declaring December 7th a date which will live in infamy. The United States declared war on Japan, and a few days later Germany and Italy, honoring their pact with Japan, declared war on the United States. The European and Asian conflicts had now merged into one true world war. The sleeping giant, as Yamamoto had reportedly feared, was now filled with a terrible resolve. By the spring of 1944, the tide of the war in Europe had turned. The Soviet Union was grinding the German army down on the vast Eastern Front, and the Allies had fought their way up the Italian peninsula. Yet the heart of Hitler's so-called Fortress Europe remained untouched. For years, the Allies had been planning the most complex and ambitious amphibious invasion in history, a landing in Nazi-occupied France to open the long-awaited Second Front. This was Operation Overlord. Its success was absolutely paramount to the liberation of Western Europe. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. The question was not if, but where. They had constructed the Atlantic Wall, a formidable line of coastal defenses stretching from Norway to Spain, bristling with concrete bunkers, artillery, machine guns, and millions of mines. The German High Command, led by the astute Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, largely expected the invasion to come at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. The Allies, aware of this, mounted an elaborate and highly successful deception campaign, Operation Fortitude, to reinforce this belief. This deception involved creating a phantom army in southeast England, complete with inflatable tanks, dummy aircraft, and falsified radio traffic, all commanded by the famous General George S. Patton. The ruse worked brilliantly, convincing the Germans to keep their most powerful panzer divisions stationed near Calais, away from the real target, the beaches of Normandy. The choice of Normandy was a gamble. The beaches were wider and the weather more unpredictable, but it was less heavily defended. After being delayed for 24 hours by a storm, the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, made the fateful decision. Okay, let's go. In the pre-dawn hours of June 6, 1944, D-Day, the invasion began. The first to go were the airborne divisions. Over 24,000 American, British, and Canadian paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines in the darkness, their mission to seize key bridges, road junctions, and gun batteries to disrupt the German response and protect the flanks of the seaborne landings. As dawn broke, the largest armada the world has ever seen appeared off the Normandy coast. Nearly 7,000 vessels, battleships, destroyers, landing craft and support ships stretched as far as the eye could see. They unleashed a ferocious naval bombardment on the German coastal defences, a thunderous prelude to the main assault. The scale of the operation was simply breathtaking, a testament to years of planning and industrial might. The invasion force was to land on 5 designated beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword. On 4 of the beaches, Utah, Gold, Juno and Sword, the landings, while difficult and costly, went largely according to plan. The combination of the naval bombardment and specialized armored vehicles like the so-called Hobart's Funnies helped the British and Canadian forces overcome the German defences and push inland, linking up with the airborne troops. But on Omaha Beach, the plan went disastrously wrong. Here, the American forces faced the veteran German 352nd Infantry Division, which the Allies had not expected to be there. The preliminary bombardment had largely missed its targets, leaving the formidable defences on the bluffs overlooking the beach intact. As the landing craft dropped their ramps, the men were met with a murderous hail of machine gun and artillery fire. The first wave was cut to pieces. For hours, the situation on Omaha was desperate. Pinned down on the narrow strip of sand, with the tide rising behind them and an impenetrable wall of fire in front, the invasion teetered on the brink of catastrophic failure. The soldiers were trapped in a brutal killing zone. It was only through small acts of immense bravery and leadership from junior officers and NCOs that small groups began to rally, breach the seawall, and slowly, painstakingly fight their way up the bluffs to silence the German guns. By the end of this longest day, the Allies had suffered over 10,000 casualties, with more than 4,400 confirmed dead. The cost was horrendous, but they had achieved their objective. A foothold had been established on the continent. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's great fortress, had been breached. The men and material that would be needed to liberate France could now pour ashore. D-Day was not the end of the war, nor even the beginning of the end. A long and brutal fight through the hedgerows of Normandy and across France and Germany still lay ahead. But it was, as Churchill said, the end of the beginning. The second front was open. The final, decisive phase in the struggle to defeat Nazi Germany had begun, born of immense courage and sacrifice on the blood-soaked sands of Normandy. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered and Hitler was dead. But in the Pacific, the war against the Empire of Japan raged on with undiminished ferocity. The American island-hopping campaign had brought its forces ever closer to the Japanese home islands, but the cost was staggering. The battles for islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa had demonstrated the fanatical resolve of the Japanese defenders, who fought to the last man and inflicted horrific casualties. The prospect of invading the Japanese mainland, an operation codenamed Downfall, was terrifying to Allied planners. They projected that such an invasion could cost over 1 million Allied casualties and many millions more Japanese lives, both military and civilian. The Japanese government was showing no signs of surrender, instead preparing its entire population to resist the invaders with bamboo spears and suicidal determination. The war seemed destined for a bloody, protracted and apocalyptic conclusion. However, a new and terrible power was about to enter the equation. For several years, in the utmost secrecy, the United States had been engaged in the Manhattan Project, a colossal scientific and industrial effort to develop an atomic bomb. Led by physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, the project had successfully tested its first device in the New Mexico desert in July 1945, unleashing a power previously unknown to humanity. President Harry S. Truman, who had only learned of the project after Roosevelt's death, now faced an awesome and terrible choice. Truman and his advisors believed that using this new weapon might force a Japanese surrender without the need for a costly invasion, ultimately saving lives on both sides. After issuing the Potsdam Declaration, an ultimatum calling for Japan's unconditional surrender, which was subsequently ignored, the decision was made. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay took off from the island of Tinian, carrying a single uranium bomb codenamed Little Boy. Its target was the city of Hiroshima. At 8:15 in the morning, the bomb was released. It detonated about 2,000 feet above the city center, creating a blinding flash of light and a fireball that incinerated everything within a mile radius. A powerful shockwave and intense heat blast radiated outwards, flattening buildings and starting a massive firestorm. Tens of thousands of people were killed instantly. The city, which had been a bustling industrial and military hub, was transformed in a moment into a scorched radioactive wasteland. The Japanese leadership was stunned, struggling to comprehend the nature of the weapon that had destroyed an entire city in a single blast. Yet even in the face of this unprecedented destruction, there was still deadlock within the government. The military hardliners refused to countenance surrender, arguing that the Americans could not possibly have more than one such bomb. They were tragically mistaken. 3 days later, on August 9th, with no surrender forthcoming from Japan, a second B-29 boxcar departed for its target. The primary target, Kokura, was obscured by clouds, so the bomber diverted to its secondary target, the city of Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., a plutonium bomb, Fat Man, was dropped. Although the hilly terrain of Nagasaki somewhat contained the blast, the destruction was still immense. Another 40,000 people were killed instantly. On that same day, the Soviet Union, honoring its agreement with the Allies, declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria, swiftly crushing the Japanese forces there. The combination of these three devastating blows, 2 atomic bombs and the Soviet invasion, was finally enough to break the will of the Japanese War Council. The Emperor, Hirohito, intervened personally, a move unheard of in Japanese politics, and made the decision to bear the unbearable and surrender. On August 15, 1945, the people of Japan heard their emperor's voice for the first time as he announced the nation's surrender in a radio broadcast. The Second World War, the most destructive conflict in human history, was finally over. The celebrations that erupted across the Allied world were immense. A release of 6 years of tension, fear, and loss. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain one of the most controversial acts in history. They brought a swift end to the war and averted the bloodbath of an invasion, but they did so at a horrific cost to the civilian populations of 2 cities. They also ushered in the nuclear age, a new era of geopolitical tension where humanity, for the first time, possessed the power to bring about its own extinction. The fire of 1,000 suns had ended one war, only to cast a long, dark shadow over the future of the world. From the plains of Poland to the atomic wasteland of Nagasaki, we have journeyed through the cataclysmic events that defined the Second World War. Each moment, the desperate defense of Britain, the shock of Pearl Harbor, the immense bravery on D-Day, was a turning point, a fulcrum upon which the fate of the world pivoted. These were not isolated incidents, but interconnected parts of a vast global struggle that tested the limits of human cruelty and the depths of human courage. They demonstrate how ideology, technology, and individual decisions can converge to irrevocably alter the course of history. The conclusion of this conflict reshaped our planet in ways that are still profoundly felt today. It led to the fall of old empires and the rise of 2 new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, setting the stage for the decades-long Cold War. It spurred the creation of the United Nations, an attempt to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. The horrors of the Holocaust gave new urgency to the concept of human rights, while the dawn of the atomic age introduced a terrifying new dimension to international relations. Our modern world was forged in the crucible of this war. The alliances, the technologies, the political boundaries, and the very consciousness of our global society bear its indelible scars and lessons. To look back at these key moments is not simply an exercise in history, it is an exploration of our own origins, a reminder of the fragility of peace, and a testament to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable darkness. The echoes of this great and terrible conflict continue to shape our present and will undoubtedly influence our future.